everybody, and welcome. I'm Albert Flynn DeSilver, and this is Waking Up in Daily Life, conversations with artists, writers, and spiritual teachers. And I want to welcome everybody, and I'm so excited to have with me today Karen Brailsford. Welcome, Karen. I'm so delighted to have you join us.
Thank you so much, Albert. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, great. So I sort of wanted to jump right into a little bit about how we connected, because I think it's an interesting, it's a little bit of an interesting story. I understand that you grew up in New York, in the South Bronx. Is that right?
Mhm.
And I grew up in Westchester County, not too far away. And I grew up in this world of just like insane, bizarre privilege, being a white male, and my parents had all this money, and et cetera, et cetera. And for people who don't know about the South Bronx, I mean, I'll let you share a little bit how our communities that we grew up in are different. Um, but I love, part of what I love about this connection in our conversation is that we're sort of coming together via spirituality, and a couple of connections. Spring Washam is one connection we were talking about off air, and Agape International down in Los Angeles, Michael Bernard Beckwith, who I am just a huge fan of. And I had finally I got to get down to LA right before the pandemic and attend live. And it was just after years of reading and listening, to be in that space and to be with that community was just so awesome. So I want to welcome you. And I thought it would be great to begin with a little bit about your story about the Baptist Church, and was Reverend Goodwine. And there's just so many beautiful little stories at the beginning of your book.
Thank you so much. Yes, and in the introduction to my book, I do write about my spiritual journey, which began at Fort Mott Baptist Church in the South Bronx, a storefront church, and it was named for Fort Mott, South Carolina. The founding minister had hailed from Fort Mott, South Carolina, and his name, aptly enough, was Goodwine, which I just love. And so he was the founding minister and the pastor, and there was a deacon Goodwine and the Goodwine. So I grew up in that environment, starting at about the age of, I think, maybe 8 or 9. And it started out as a covenant. I started going as a covenant, basically, when my mother's own mother passed away. My mother promised her that she would, yes, send her kids to church. And that was the church that we started going to. My mother would walk us to the door and leave us to go to Sunday school. And then, of course, after a few Sundays, the ushers are like, Sister Brailsford, rather, would you like to join us? And so she became a prominent member and a beloved member of that community. And as a matter of fact, on my website, I have a picture of my mother, who has since made her own transition, at Fort Mott Baptist Church, I think, and you can see her on a glorious Sunday morning. So that was my foundation. You talked about growing up in Westchester, and I did grow up in the South Bronx. But I also had entree into the world that you grew up in, Albert, because I attended this exclusive girls' school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. So we probably know some of the same people.
And
So
which school was that?
I went to Brearley.
Okay.
On
Yeah.
83rd, which is right in Colsharts Park, where Gracie Mansion is located. So that's where I went to school, and I'm still involved with Brearley to some degree. I was just on a call the other week about Brearley, and I'm probably going to do a panel next month about Brearley. So anyway, so I traversed these two worlds, but the through line in my life, and I gather in your life, it sounds like, is that I was always in search of something deeper. I always knew that I wanted to have a personal connection to this thing called God, that I got to see expressed in these very, visceral and dynamic ways in the Baptist church, speaking of tongues and people falling out, including my own mother, who was someone who was very prim and proper and very sophisticated, and who never would have wanted to be, quote unquote, slain in the spirit, with her skirt maybe pulled up above her knee if she could help it. So I always knew that she couldn't help it and that this thing was real.
Mm.
So as I write in my introduction, I had always wanted to have my own connection to this thing. And I always wondered what it felt like to fly that way or to be that way. And so even as a kid, every year when it came time to write your New Year's resolutions,
Mhm.
um, agape style, we don't talk about resolutions, we talk about setting intentions. But back then I called them resolutions. And
Mhm.
so at the top was always be closer to God. And so I was always seeking, and in college, I attended the church there. I was active there, a church called Black Church at Yale, and
Mm.
um, wonderful music, and I really enjoyed it. But still, I just thought there was still something missing, and so I stopped going altogether. And I remember my mother always saying, "Well, as long as you go somewhere, like as long as you're seeking." And so fast forward, to my move to Los Angeles, and I walked into Agape for the first time. And
And how did
I
you hear about agape?
I heard about it. I was just going to share. I heard about it because I was seeing an acupuncturist. Come on, I'm in LA. Of course, I'm going to go see acupuncturist.
Right, it's required.
A colleague had suggested this acupuncturist, and it was such a strange experience because when she put the needles in me, I felt this quiver, like a physical quiver. And then she left the room and left me in the room. And I started what one would describe, I guess, as speaking in tongues in a way. And I
Mm.
started singing, and I was singing the
Oh,
songs from when I was a kid. I remember three different
wow.
songs came up, and I just started singing, and I was very emotional.
Mm.
And so she left me to my own devices, or to spirit's own devices. And then when she walks back in, I'm like, so do you work with spirit? Because I had no idea what an acupuncturist was or what they did. And
Right.
so I haven't really studied it, and I've tried to research it. So I think what happened was that, she just opened that there's a connection between what happens with, I don't know, chi and energy, and then
Mhm.
it's all of the same stuff. Um, so of course I also asked her, oh, I've been looking for a church. I feel like I need to go to a church. And that was because okay, yes, I was a New Yorker, and I had not learned how to drive until I moved to Los Angeles. And so I had two accidents right away. And
Oh,
then the third
no.
one was so bizarre. I really felt like the universe was like tapping me. Something was trying to get my attention.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Maybe I should go to a church. And so she mentioned, oh, I go to this place. It's so great. It's multiracial. She herself was Japanese American. And she's like, you might want to try agape. And so I walked through the doors and the music, and I sat down and I'm listening. And all of a sudden I hear this voice that says, stand up. I'm like, stand up. The voice came from within me, or, it wasn't a person talking to me. I did not want to stand up like, and call attention to myself. But then I had no choice, it almost felt like. So I was on my feet, and I couldn't bend my knees. I remember that my knees were so stiff, like I couldn't sit down even if I wanted to. And then all of a sudden I started just expressing in this way, the same way that I had seen my mother express,
Mhm.
those decades earlier. And I remember, like, my hands, arms flailing, and, apologizing to the couple in front of me because I was aware of what was happening, but had no control. So I could say, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And this woman turns
Wow.
around, she goes, it's all right, baby. You just got the spirit. So,
That's
and I
awesome.
remember that so well. Now, I've never seen that happen in Agape's. Um, I don't think of Agape as being that kind of place where people do express that way. So that it was
Mhm.
so interesting to me that at least I was sitting behind the people who were like, "That's okay. We understand exactly what's going on, even if we
Yes.
don't see this every Sunday." So that was
Yeah.
my awareness. Oh, well, this place feels like home, and clearly I've been called to be here, and that's how I started
Mm.
attending.
Oh, what a beautiful and amazing story. I sort of want to drill down a little bit more into growing up in the Bronx and making that transition to Yale, and just the contrast you must have felt in regard. I mean, I don't know that much about the background of your family life, and I mean, it sounds like there was a lot of love and acceptance and encouragement spiritually from your mom. And yeah, just going to well, the girls' school first of all, but then also Yale, just all that privilege and contrast. I'm just wondering what that was like for you.
It's so interesting because my mother, I suppose I navigated it fairly well, and I can't ask why 11-year-old, 12-year-old would be able to do that, except that, um, now I would say maybe on some soul level there was this connection, and I belong there, even though it may not look like I did, or my history. So I would travel, via subway and bus, the East End, the crosstown bus at 86th Street in Manhattan to Brearley, which was on East End Avenue. So that was quite a journey. If you think about
Hmm.
that journey, I would go past, people standing, then I don't think we talked so much about people weren't homeless then, as I remember. There were people standing on the street who, what were they doing? They're just hanging out all day. Maybe some of them went inebriated, or some of them were addicts, but families, and just a mixed, diverse, really rich um, environment. And then I would get on the subway and then, come out onto Lexington Avenue, completely different scenario. We would joke about the fact that when there was a snowstorm, that that you would never know, the next day that there had been a snowstorm when you got to 86th Street, because it would have all been swept away. Whereas in the South Bronx, the snow mounds would just linger for weeks on end. So anyhow, so yes, it was quite different, but I had a very nurturing couple of friends, ironically, both of whom I was emailing with this morning just about, oh, what's going
Oh,
on? And I got my, who got their vaccines or who didn't get their vaccines, and remembering some interesting experiences that we had together as a child. And one of the friends found these journals and notes that we had taken. So she had sent them to us. So interesting that you bring this all up. So I'm still close friends with my Brearley girls. And there
hmm.
is this connection, even the 43 or so girls who graduate together. We were just on a thread because of alumni night. So there's this connection. So I was part of it, but then I had a separate life in the
Hmm.
Bronx with my friends and family members there. And I, for the most part, did not try to merge the two. I really would go into that world. And this has come up in discussions lately, especially this past year, in light of the civil unrest and everything
Hmm.
that's been happening,
Okay.
and the kinds of conversations that people are having about racism in America. So this has all come up, um, and I remember, it's funny what one forgets and what one remembers. Like I have to go to sometimes to my girlfriends and say, "Oh, so what happened back then?" Or
Hmm.
and so one of these friends, who's white, a couple of months ago was sharing about an incident in a classroom that we had, in which I think the teacher was sharing about, maybe it was James Baldwin or something like that, and one of the classmates said, "Well, basically, we don't have to worry about that. Like, there's no racism here. There's nothing like that going on."
Hmm.
And maybe try to single me out. And my girlfriend said she felt like, well, yeah, stuff is going on. Karen's the only person of color sitting here in this room. So,
Mm.
so in terms of what it was like to navigate those worlds, those two different worlds, I did it because that was, and I probably did it maybe a little more effortlessly than some others
Mm.
might have. Especially now when I look back and see, recently there was some controversy in terms of what was going on at Burley more recently.
Hmm.
And so in some ways I kind of lived a bubble existence in terms of having really close friends and feeling connected to different people
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
teachers there whom I kept in touch. So I don't know. I think I always think it's kind of funny when people say, well, what was that like? Because, well, I didn't know anything else. So it's what I was navigating and what I did. And so I'm sure, at 21, I would have had one viewpoint of what that was like. And now
Right.
my viewpoint is that, oh, that was my life and that's what I did. And I take all the good that came out of it, and know that that place, going to that school, and the people I met all helped shape who I am.
Hmm.
It's also
Yeah.
critical. I think I mentioned in the book, in the intro, that one of the the girls, my friends, her mother, the family, they were pretty agnostic. And I credit that mother with propelling me on my spiritual journey because,
Interesting.
oh, yes, absolutely. Because I know that it just didn't make sense to me that, well, I'll just say Mrs. D is such a beautiful human being and she's so amazing and she'd done amazing things in her life and was so helpful and so sweet and so kind.
Mm.
The God I knew, the God I wanted to believe in wouldn't send her to hell.
Mm.
And so as a, you know, as an 11-year-old, it was just like, oh, this doesn't compute. So that's actually what made me think that there's something more.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
that I'm getting mixed messages or confusing messages from certain beliefs because
Mhm.
there's no way that she's going to hell.
Right, right. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I also love what you said about belonging. You know, having the sense like I belong there. Like, why wouldn't I be able to come to this place that's, you know, traditionally, socially, culturally been exclusive, or we've been excluded from, but why shouldn't this be a place of belonging for me also? Um, and that's just, you know, that's a beautiful thing to, and not necessarily an obvious thing. You know, mostly one would think, oh, it would be awkward, or it would be not feel, I don't know, maybe not feeling accepted or included somehow. And just that level of belonging, I mean, that just says so much about um, how you were raised, and what your vision of the world was, in terms of
Mm.
just feeling like, oh yeah, there's no place that's not for me somehow. Is that, I don't know if I'm really
I think it's more
articulating that
about,
right.
I do hear what you're saying. I think it's more about finding your people wherever you are.
Yeah.
You know, because as you said, what you said, I know I had this idea that my life was so different from all the other girls' life, but I remember 12th senior year, we had the opportunity to do internships, and I was offered a paying job at Brearley in the alumni office. And I think that was partly because they knew I could use the money,
Mm.
you know, and that was really generous and kind. And then it was, and I remember, and I probably still have the notes in which they said that it'd be so lovely to have you and your presence sitting there greeting people as they came into the school. So there was this sense of belonging. But I remember talking to one of my classmates, and I just assumed everyone was on it. I figured everyone was paying their way. But a number of the girls were on scholarships, you know, who weren't girls of color. And I remember that coming up, and it was because you didn't talk about money, and I did miss that period wherein, you know, I think if I'd gone there, I started in 6th grade. If I'd gone there in kindergarten, everyone gets invited to the birthday party, right? The whole class would have been invited, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade. So you would have seen the homes. So I only saw the homes of my friends who I became close to, not everyone. So, so maybe I would have been a little more intimidated or a little like confused about, oh my gosh, you know, the wealth or whatever. But so I think it's really about finding, anyway, this particular person, I remember her mentioning that she was on a full scholarship. And it was kind of like, oh, you know, that, oh, she was like, I just assumed, you know. So I really think it's about finding your people. There are a number of girls who I'm sure certainly did not feel like they belong for different reasons. You know, I just think that no matter who we are, and I'm not trying to downplay racism, sexism, or the unique place that I, as a woman of color, occupy, space that I occupy, but I just know from different friends, like they've all felt like outsiders, you know, at different points. And I remember talking to my roommate freshman year, whom I'm also still close to, and I remember her telling, we're telling some story about being perceived as the nanny, and she's like, because she's blonde and blue eyed and Jewish, and her daughter was redhead, that, you know, that she was perceived as the nanny. Like people didn't seem to, so, you know, so everyone has their own story of being an outsider, and maybe if we could all see that, those common elements, and not vilify the person who might seem to be the outsider, or vilify someone who seems to be other, because you know, as my spiritual practice teaches, there is no other. There is no other. There's only the one. There's only the common energy that I call God, or the one life, and it indwells each and every one of us, and it expresses in different ways and different colors of skin, and that's all beautiful. But really, we have so much more in common than we do
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And just coming back to Agape for a second, I want to just share with you my first experience of going there
We'd love
live.
to hear it.
I was coming down to Insight LA to teach, and I had this just, I don't know, I stayed at this hotel in Santa Barbara on the way down, and I think it was a Best Western, which is normally like, $79 or whatever. And of course, because it's Santa Barbara, they charge like $300. Anyways, I couldn't sleep. I was having like this totally weird panic attack. And so I was up at like 3:30 in the morning and just wandering the streets of Santa Barbara. And it just wasn't going, the energy wasn't going away. But I knew also that I had time before I had to get to inside LA that I could attend the 9 o'clock mass, 9 a.m. mass at Agape. And so I just started driving at 6 a.m. to make sure I could get there on time.
That's great.
And I got in there, and I was still nervous. I was like, I'm showing up to this whole new community. I've never been there. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know, like, is this okay for me to be here? Is this like a weird thing? Anyways, I get there, and of course they do this whole ritual of acceptance and welcoming for new people, and you stand up and everyone turns to you, and they just like radiate love, and they give you this special little card that I still have on my altar. And then I was standing next to these two African-American women who just grabbed my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, welcome. And I just like burst into tears. It was just like, this is a space for everyone. And part of me could have not been surprised because I know Michael Bernard Beckwith's work. I've studied it, I've read it, I've listened to it, yada yada yada. But until you're in that space and really feeling the energy and the love and acceptance, it's just like, wow.
I'm so glad you got to experience that, because you should know that. Well, first of all, it's so wonderful that you were there in the flesh, because, we have been online, and we were always online. We always streamed services even before the pandemic. So we're fond of saying that we were really prepared for it, because amazingly, we had this, very vibrant online community streaming the services. But I'm so glad that you were able to experience it in person. And when I sit in the audience as a person who's extending, my hands and saying welcome, I tend to cry during that point too. And it's not my first time, it's my whatever thousandth time, but it's a really emotional moment.
That's exactly it. No, I was just full on streaming. Anyways, I just wanted to share that little anecdote. But let's talk about your book, because I just love this book. I love the whole, and this is so instructive for a lot of my community who is mostly writers, mostly women writers. And one of the things that they struggle with so much is around the creativity stuff is, besides all the sort of negative self-talk and the doubts and the comparison mind, yada, 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 is structure. And one of the things that I love so much about your book, there are many, many things, but it was the structure. And I just want to say out loud many times that the book is called Sacred Landscapes of the Soul. And it's coming out in paperback this month or next month?
It's coming out in paperback in April, yes.
In April, okay, awesome.
The beautiful hardcover came out last September.
I love it. Congratulations again. It's just an incredible book. And could you talk a little bit about that structure? Because you've got these 111 passages, 9 sacred landscapes, and 3 terrains.
Yes.
And it's sort of like the whole layout has got this numerology thing going. I would love to hear more about that.
Okay, so that's it. I'm so glad you pointed this out, because what's so interesting is that there's a lot of structure, but a lot of it was very organic. So many of the pieces, a number of the pieces appeared in Agape's Intervisions magazine. And so I had these pieces, and I thought it'd be nice to present them in a book. A number of people had said to me, Karen, you should really put these in a book.
Mhm.
And so I had to credit my literary agent who, because I had this idea, oh, from A to Z. And he's like, well, that sounds very like a children's book, Karen. And so I think I was really guided. I played with different ways of what would be the concept. And landscapes was not the first concept. And I think
Mhm.
this is just a really important tidbit for people who are writers. Like the process of figuring out, or not figuring out, but allowing the structure to kind of like take shape was actually a game. It was really fun. I remember having pieces of paper, and
Mhm.
I think so. Yeah, the A to Z wasn't going to work. I thought about, did I think about colors? I just thought of different ways, and then I seized upon landscapes. And once I did seize upon landscapes, it's like it's got to be landscapes, and and then just think of all the different landscapes there are. So
Oh,
that
yeah.
was another
Mhm.
fun time I had, just figuring out the different kinds of landscapes, and then and this is over a period of time, because I think at this point, when I really had my first conversation with my agent, who is Todd Schuster, who's at Aevitas, which is where I now work,
Mhm.
um, uh, he was so instructive and really, really helped me with the structure of it
Mhm.
all. In terms of just just asking me questions that would just push me to like go further. So then,
Um,
once I just decided the landscapes, I mean, to the point that even that final landscape, the vastness, I called it something else. I called it the abyss. And I
ah,
liked the way that sounded. And
right,
he
right.
kept thinking like, but it sounds kind of like negative.
Mm.
And I still couldn't really hear it or see it at first. And then finally I seized upon vastness. So this idea of like being creative and allowing spirit, and then a human being, the agent, to kind of like play with it all. It was so fun. And then for some reason, it was very late in the game when I realized, oh my gosh, no, there's three more, overarching um, ways to organize this all. And that's when I came up with the terrain. And that all helped me in identifying what each landscape was and how one felt in the landscape. And then the terrains, that really did come organically, in terms of like, and that was so fun. It was like this muse, was
Mhm.
helping me along. And of course, in the person of, also there was this human being. And so that was really fun. And then the pieces and figuring out where they might go and where they might fall, that was really fun. And I have to say, all of the pieces come very easily and effortlessly to me,
Mhm.
almost as if I'm channeling them. So channeling them,
Yeah.
it's a voice that I don't really have to think about. People would say, I remember people have asked me, oh, I imagine you sitting at your desk and writing, really thinking. And I'm like, nope, I can be in my bed, on my iPhone, which is how I like
Mhm.
to write, on my notes, and, or I'm just typing and they just come. And yes, I shape them. The editor in me shapes them and changes things and moves things around sometimes. So they're not the ones that came through as God. I'm very reluctant to mess with those. But,
Well,
and so
can I
I
ask you, while you're, I'm sorry to interrupt, but while you're in this, talking a little bit about process, this is so fascinating and important. Um, are you kind of setting yourself up in terms of meditation, like, or meditatively in any way
No, I don't. It's
before
really,
you write?
yeah, it's really, I'm trying to think. There are a couple of times when, there were a couple of times I remember in which like something would not be coming, and I would think, oh, but that would just be because, and I'd have a deadline. I'd be thinking, okay, I need to write this piece. And
Mhm.
sometimes it just wouldn't come. And I would know, oh, it's not ready to come. And then something would happen like in the world that would trigger the piece. I guess I'm so connected to whatever's coming through that I
Mhm.
know when to wait, even though the deadline it might be that, oh, well, it's going past the deadline, okay, but it's
Mhm.
not time. And then I would open up the newspaper 3 days later, and there would be the event,
Right.
that no one, you reading the book, would not know what was happening in my life or what was happening in the world, because the pieces are so all encompassing or not
Mhm.
specific, but I can look at them now and remember, oh yeah, that's what I was going through at that moment, or that's what was happening in the world. And spirit was, offering up a balm, as I call
Hmm.
it, regarding this particular situation that is more universal. Therefore, we can present it this way. So
Yeah.
I don't. No. It's not as if I would like light candles or like sit the setting, because I can pretty much go there so easily. Usually, for the most
Mhm.
part, I do. I can.
Yeah. And is that from, do you think that's from just years of contemplative practice?
I think
Yeah.
so, and I also think it's from that whatever. Well, I take that back. I don't know if it's from years of contemplative practice. I think it might be from years of spiritual availability.
Hmm.
So I'm not saying that being available is not a practice, but when you say the word practice, I'm hearing something more formal. I mean, I
Yeah.
studied at Agape's University, and I'm a licensed practitioner. So there is a study, but when it comes to my writing, I think of it, of course, all of that informs it, but I think it's more about, for me, it feels more about being available. and
I
and I
love
just
that.
kind of did that intuitively, in terms of, it's like, oh, I'm just kind of stepping back and letting what wants to come through. And because I'm a writer, I've done that. I've had more practice doing that as a writer.
Hmm.
I suppose if I were, I assume, and I do paint, and I haven't been painting so much lately, but when I painted, that same process happens. And then I suppose if I were a violinist, well, I did play as a kid briefly, that would, I think, whatever one's outlet is, a mode of expression, that if one is able to, it's a dance in terms of stepping back and then still being really engaged in it.
Well, I think what strikes me is that you are one of these people who might have been born or raised in, I got it, just in a way of like that the flow is here. The flow, like you don't have to be
Mm,
scared, like, because I was not born that way. Many people were not born, and they're so much more subject to their conditioning.
mhm.
So it's really hard to be available because it could be dangerous, it could be too vulnerable, etc. But what I'm hearing from you, and I'm just curious if this is true, and um, that availability, that spiritual availability, or what I call the creative field, is kind of constantly going through you. Is that kind of how it is?
It's funny. I hadn't really thought about it so much that way, but I think you're right. I mean, I grew up in a family. You heard me talk about my mom, her spirituality, but and I wrote a more creative piece about this, and that people had dreams, aunts and uncles, like there was this rich culture steeped in what some might call, lore and spirituality. And,
Hmm.
I remember hearing stories about, oh, yes, growing up in the you know, darkness of South Carolina roads, where you'd see all kinds of strange things, you know, that weren't, blocked out because of like bright city lights and funny stories. So I think this idea of this other world existing,
Hmm.
that we all have access to, and people having dreams, and dreams that would come true, not just. So
Yeah.
that's certainly my family's culture. I suppose Black culture in general.
Hmm.
And other groups of people, I'm sure. But yeah, that's what I know. So it was normal to hear about
Yeah.
this, and so yes.
Wow. Well, so coming back to the book and the sacred landscapes and this really beautiful structure that you've come up with, how important or how influential was either the South Bronx or other places that you grew up or that you found yourself or found your body moving through in terms of space? Because the South Bronx, the Bronx in general, the Bronx is like a very diverse place physically. And like the north part of it, there's the zoo is there, and there's this like giant, amazing park. And then the South Bronx is along the shoreline, so there's all this influence. So I'm just curious what your like the landscape influences were for you growing up.
Hmm. The topography, I think certainly it influenced me in that it made me want to go more inner, I would say. Like I remember
Mm.
really resonating with Thoreau when we read Thoreau at Brearley and Walden, the idea of these vast spaces and nature, because that wasn't necessarily what, any of us were seeing in the city. And I didn't have a country house to go to, as some of my friends did, but I did go down to South Carolina in the summers sometimes.
Mhm.
And so the idea of landscapes and the idea of being able to travel far in your mind, in your head, which is what I did as a kid because I loved
Mhm.
reading. I was always, on my bed reading. The
Mm.
idea that there were different landscapes of different peoples whom one could resonate with. I was thinking about this more recently because one of my favorite books was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
Mhm.
And I really resonated with,
Mm.
the protagonist, Franny Nolan. I really resonated with her and her life and and her father and so that was, and she lived in Brooklyn, not in the Bronx.
Right, right, right. Yeah,
At the
yeah.
other end, that was very different. Um, and so again, I guess the theme as as I'm talking to you now is the idea that one can resonate with something, someone, a place that isn't seemingly of you, but
Mhm.
of course it's of you because we're all made of the same stuff,
Right.
we all come from, stardust. We're all made of stardust. We're all made of this matter that incarnates. So um in some ways it makes a great deal of sense to me that one could feel a sense of place at a place you've never been. I remember going to Singapore and feeling really, really comfortable
Wow.
and feeling like,
Yeah.
oh my God, these three different cultures, these three different peoples. I felt so at home there. It's very strange. I remember like writing
Yeah.
postcards and friends were like, you seem more connected there than you did when you went to Ghana. It was so interesting
Mhm.
for me. And we get to see that with people we meet, right?
Yeah.
With people, and there's an instant connection, and people like to talk about past lives. I'm not that much into that because it just makes it all like really technical, and it's, I think, a human way of trying to understand what's just our inherent um, oneness. It seems to me, of course, you should be able to connect with someone who you've never seen before because
Right.
who knows, you're made of the same stuff anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. I spent time traveling in East Africa, in Tanzania and Kenya, and I felt really comfortable there. Which, I mean, at first, of course, I was sort of terrified and like, where am I and what's going on here, and disoriented. But then, the more I spent time with people, and I had the chance to live with families, and hang out at the university, and it was like, I mean, it was really like living there in daily life with people, and I just felt so
Hmm.
comfortable and just so like natural. And then starting to learn a little bit of the language, and which is counterintuitive, right? Like you feeling comfortable in Singapore is kind of counterintuitive, but on a spiritual level, it makes perfect sense, right?
Yes.
To be at home wherever you are, because wherever you go, there you are, right?
Exactly, exactly. As someone has said, a very popular book.
That's right. That's right. Well, I want to quote you, if I may. This the line that I absolutely loved that I read. I think this might have been in the introduction. But you say, I believe that words on a page carry a vibration. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
Yes, yes. I really feel that about um, sacred landscapes of the soul because I think that, well, I know from people writing to me or, friends calling me up or texting me that, I opened the book to, it's really strange, Karen, but I open the book and, and then whatever's going on with me, I will be able to find that passage. Only recently did I realize, oh, I can do that too with my own book. So,
That's right.
so like last week, something was going on. I'm like, okay, I need some inspiration. And I picked up my book and opened it. And it was, and indeed, it's true, So I just think, because I think, and of course, this has happened. I mean, that's how I feel about the Bible. I mean, I have a Bible that my mother gave me when I first moved to LA. That, I feel that it's alive, with these rich stories. And I feel that with a number of different books. And I think it has to do with the energy with which it was written and what was poured into it. So words and language, yes, it's also vibrant. It's also dynamic. And I love that one of the readers told me that he uses my book like the I Ching, So, and I love that people are doing that for some reason, as opposed, I mean, some people have told me they just read it from cover to cover, but usually it's about opening it up and then like finding a passage. I can't remember where I said that. It must be in the introduction then, about words having a vibration. Maybe not. There's one of the pieces. What the funny thing is about having let these pieces flow through me, I don't always remember them or what's in them. But one of the pieces I've used as the title of my blog, and of course I don't want to say the wrong title. It's either Life is God Writ Large or Life is God Writ Large, which is a piece. And I remember, when it came through me, and I chose that as the title of the blog. And I think maybe that line that you mentioned might come from there, but I'm not sure. But it's the same idea that of just writing is just this creative writing. The word streaming comes to me, streaming, and not to say that everything I write comes that effortlessly, not at all, especially if I'm in my head. If I can balance the two, I find that it's great. But I also love word plays, and I love words and changing them and playing with them. But I just also love when it's just like, something comes through. It's fun. It's really, really fun for me. So I think that energy comes through a little bit maybe in the book, in terms of that I'm having fun with some of the words. And sometimes I remember being a little concerned that, maybe people won't understand this or get it. But I think you get the playfulness as well in the book, as well as the spirituality.
That's great.
It's really playful more than anything, probably. So I think
that's important, because it can get a little precious, right?
Yeah, a little precious and a little heavy, and we take ourselves too seriously, and we take life too seriously. My favorite PS is always like, and certainly I honor people where they are, especially when I'm working with them one-on-one as a practitioner. And I've noticed, I guess I got this from Michael Beckwith, because I remember years ago he used to say this. I don't know if he says this so much anymore, but I remember years ago him saying that, people would be sharing their problems, and he'd be going, like, as in zero, as in it's nothing, like it's nothing, and so you can't tell someone that. And so I think, of course not. So I don't think he says that so much, but he did used to say that. But I took that to heart, because in my way, sometimes I go, even when I know I'm experiencing something, my human self is experiencing something that's very serious and important, or maybe it's emotional, or maybe it's painful. Like, I know that feels really, really real. But I also am fond of saying something like, but we know none of this is real anyway, right? So that's kind of like we know this is another, like, yes, let's march, and yes, let's do that. Ooh, who's that in that seat in the White House? We know none of this is real anyhow. So that's my way of sometimes like alleviating the sense of, doom and gloom,
which can get so heavy.
Being aware that that's all really real in the human existence, but there's something else bigger that's happening, that I feel
Hmm.
bigger that is happening, even in the midst of the pain, even in the midst of the sorrow. I mean, we're in a, freaking global pandemic, and, and people have suffered, and people have, transitioned, and,
Yeah.
I know people. I think my brother was telling me, we were kind of counting, and he was telling me about, 12 personal friends or family members that he knows himself. And um, in my capacity as the coordinator for the pastoral care ministry, I hear stories, and oh my gosh, my heart is just really open, and I'm holding people and being
Hmm.
present with them. Um, but then I also, at the same time, have this sense of like, about the craziness and the silliness of life and what's happening sometimes. And sometimes you do have to just laugh, because it just all seems so ridiculous. And sometimes you have to turn away.
Hmm.
I had to do that at times when things were happening, and I could not watch the news, or I couldn't believe the ridiculousness of some things that seemed to be happening.
Yeah.
Um, so it's all existing simultaneously, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, this kind of brings me, this is sort of an interesting segue potentially. I'm just curious about the movement of anti-racism and how to be an anti-racist as a creative person, as a creative writer. And in your mind, I'm just curious what that looks like.
Well, I would first begin by, because words are so powerful. I'm not very fond of the word anti.
Okay.
So
Mm-hmm.
using the word anti, so it's more about what am I for, as opposed to what am
Mm-hmm.
I against.
Beautiful.
And I know at one point, what was it? Anti-racism, but there was another word a few years ago that just didn't resonate with me, because it's more about being for something. I feel like energetically that's where I am, but I hold the space for people who prefer that languaging. But I know for me, I'm very clear that that word doesn't resonate with me. So for people, or for unity and harmony and balance. So I tend to couch it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of what's happening now in the spiritually, an awakening is happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening. An awakening is happening, and a shift is happening. And you know there are people and institutions that don't are feeling the pressures of that, and of something falling away, of an old paradigm making way for something new. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
very clear that something new and dynamic is being birthed in the midst of you know these transitions and pain and conflict. And that's what keeps me positive and
Mm-hmm.
optimistic. And also, I think it's important to say, because I think we've touched, danced around it, in terms of the role of creativity in these times. I have found, I think I sent you my bio, and I said something like, lately I've been hanging out in the garden landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's just been really key for my sanity. Like when I'm creating, I'm feeling really fertile. And so,
Mm-hmm.
um, in this time of isolation, in this time of feeling separate and apart, I've been really, really busy. I've felt really motivated to write and to create and to dream and to vision, and that's helps see that helps to see me through. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, being there for other people, being supportive for other people. So this is, every now and then I, in my human essay, like, so did I really sign up for this? Did I really sign up, like, to be in a global pandemic, at the
Right.
beginning of the 21st century? And then I have to go, I guess I did, because I'm here.
Here we are. That's right.
We've come for such a time as this.
Well, I'm also curious about the the anti-racist, being an anti-racist. It's a little bit abstract for people, I think, a lot of people, and they go into like defensive mode, or I'm being labeled, and or they go into possibly into guilt mode, or they go into possibly, well, I'm a spiritual person. I love love all people. I go to
Mhm.
agape. I can't possibly be racist. So there could be elements of denial. And I'm just curious if you have sort of techniques that would help people like bring this a certain level of consciousness and awareness that I think is ultimately steeped in compassion. But how do we bring that to the surface so we can be like really honest with ourselves? Like, okay, come on, let's get uncomfortable here. Let's get into our bodies and like really not deny it away. So do you have any sort of thoughts about that?
Um, what came to mind when you first brought that up is that I really do believe in meeting people where they are.
Mhm.
I just had a conversation with someone about how critical that is as a spiritual practitioner, and you're speaking with someone, you're with a client who comes from a whole different background, maybe didn't come through agape, maybe took a class here, maybe didn't, maybe just showed up, and has languaging that might not be the languaging that we use. um, but to be aware of it, that's okay, because
Mhm.
that's where they are. And as a practitioner, my job is not to say, well, you need to let go of, victimhood, or you need to let go of, using words like trauma, or your
Right.
people who are, who know about past lives and karma. Um, and so I might have a difference of I don't want to say opinion, a difference
Mhm.
of beingness.
Mhm.
Beingness, isn't that what
Mhm.
it is? A difference
Mhm.
of beingness about those things. But I'm very aware it's not my job to like bang, to convert
Mhm.
you or to change you. It's about to meet you where you are and to accept you where you are and to have a dialogue. As a
Mhm.
practitioner, I'm actually listening. I'm actually holding the
Mhm.
space
Yes.
for you so that you come to your own aha moments. And that you come to your own, one of my favorite things is what I call your ta-da moments. And the ta-da moments, and I wrote a piece from aha to ta-da, which is, and I'm
Love
not
that.
saying it right, it's really ta-da,
Or yeah.
which is, the
Um,
magician, but actually it's God and how God feels about us. Like, ta-da, look at my beautiful creation. You're my
mhm.
beloved in whom I am well pleased. So I think in those moments of aha and ta-da, that as a practitioner, I'm helping you to facilitate that. And that's what I'm hoping to do with the book, that you read it maybe in a moment of exuberance, but maybe in a moment of feeling, feeling down or feeling hopeless, because I do take readers from, these uh, landscapes in which you're feeling overwhelmed, or you're feeling indecisive, or you're feeling, upset, to, when you're feeling energized and you're feeling connected, you're in the vastness, or you're at the mountaintop, or you're in the ocean. You realize how you're a part of this ocean, and we're all part of it, and we're just all one. So the idea is that we have different moments in our lives, and moments in a day even, in which we might traverse these different
Mhm.
landscapes. And no matter where you are, no matter how you're feeling and what you're thinking, that you can still align with the divine, which is the subtitle, aligning with the divine
Love-
wherever you are.
Yeah, I love that. That's so beautiful. Thank you for that. Um, Now we don't have that much time left, but I have so many other questions I want to ask you. But I'm fascinated also by your role. Not only do you have an agent, as you were talking about with the book, but you are an agent. Is that right? So, and you work at Aevitas, and I'm just curious what that role is like for you, and what you've seen in the publishing industry in general in terms of kind of inclusion and equity
Mm-hmm.
and things like that.
What's so interesting, Albert, you bring this up, because I had a meeting this morning. I was in a meeting at Aevitas, and this topic came up. The
Mhm.
idea of, the idea that you may have noticed that, everyone wants to sign a Black writer right now. And everyone, every publishing company is like, aha, we've got to find people of color. And so the idea is that we don't want this to just be a trend, right? This should just be the norm. Of course, publishing, we publish books, we open people's minds to different worlds and different kinds of people. So we should certainly be at the forefront of inclusion
Mm.
um, and having voices, whether they're whether it comes to sexuality or race or gender, that everyone gets to be included. And so in some ways I think that what I'm doing as an agent is very similar to what I do as a spiritual
Mm.
practitioner, which I
I
which I find is
love
really
that.
interesting. I get to, when I'm working with authors, I'm being present with them, I'm listening, I'm engaging with them, I'm helping. I'm doing the same with the manuscripts as well. This idea of really honing in on what it means and what it looks like to be a human being in all of its aspects. So it's sort of the same. It's kind of the same work in which is
Interesting.
interesting. I didn't know that going in, but I realized, oh, it's kind of similar. You're being a comfort. You're being a place of availability. I'm being open because the writing process is such a personal one, and people have such sensitivities, and so I try to be the practitioner in terms of how I interact um, with writers as well.
That's so beautiful because I don't think that all agents have that sensibility and that understanding. And because not all of them are writers, also,
Right.
so that you're in a unique position there, but also you're in a unique position in terms of being someone who is cultivating awareness and practicing love and compassion in every relationship. And um, I don't know, I've had some pretty interesting experiences in the publishing agenting world.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I would love to hear those offline. But yeah, I just think, I don't know. I was really happy when I had to send my first, because I get submissions, and I was so happy when I did respond, and even when it was a pass, like
Mm,
people responded so favorably to my passes. They're
mm.
like, "Thank you so much for taking the time out to respond to me," and
Yeah,
so that
yeah,
made me
yeah.
go, "Okay, so I can't go the route of not responding. Eventually, I will have to respond." So because I want to be supportive and be available that way. Like I don't think it's about stomping down on someone's, clamping down on someone's creativity, because what is one's creativity, right? To me, that's that energizing force, power coming through you.
Mhm.
So I don't want to stomp down on your on your inner God, right? On who you are. And so it's more about nurturing, even if it is nurturing, not in terms of that we're not going to have a dynamic that's going to go on, but there might be the right person elsewhere, and it just might be that I don't resonate with this particular work or style. But usually for me, it's like, I know, well, I'm not the right person to shepherd the project. I
Mhm.
look at it that way. That's the languaging I use,
Yeah,
because to me that's most accurate. Like, maybe I'm not the person to shepherd this and
yeah.
shepherd this, or bring this forth.
Well, and since you have this unique position, we have time maybe for one more question.
Mhm.
Uh, and I'm just curious if, like, in terms of advice for writers, because being an agent, but also being a writer, and knowing what that publishing world is, do you have like one little sort of piece of wisdom for the
Mm.
writer who still struggles and suffers with process?
Mm. Okay, so two things. The first thing that came to mind was be truthful. And that's what I
Mm,
kind of heard. So I'm like, oh, what does that mean? Let me think. Be truthful. So I think it's about authenticity, being authentic about what you're writing and why you're writing it.
mm,
I mean, I've always admired, this is kind of funny, but like I don't know, for some reason soap operas come to mind. That character who's like, determined they're gonna get their whatever, and then they're really determined, and maybe they don't always, well, we won't go there. Like, I've always admired people who like know what they want and go for it, even if it.
mhm.
And sometimes I wish I wanted those things, I could just go for those things. Like, I kind of admired that. So I'm so truthful really means being authentic to who you are and what you want and why you're doing it. So, which is to say, if it's your desire, I want to be a best-selling author. I'm like, more power to you.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
you know, or I'm doing it. I want to write commercial fiction for this. I have no problems with that. I think that there's something for every reader, and and that it's about, again, finding your people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
About finding your people. So,
I
and
love
the
it.
second thing that came to mind was just to be gentle with yourself.
Mhm.
And that really is like the 101, as a spiritual practitioner, what I'm always inviting people to do, and what I'm always inviting myself to do, to be gentle with myself, to not be so hard on myself, and to be kind
Mm.
to myself. I think that's really important.
Karen Brailsford, what a beautiful way, I think, to close our conversation. And I want to shout out really loud that the book is Sacred Landscapes of the Soul, out in paperback this month, next month, this
April,
month,
April.
April. Okay. Um, get your copy. Also buy the hardback. Share it with a friend.
Yes.
And Karen, where can we learn a little bit more information about you and your great work?
Yes. So go to my website, which I created and built, and I'm always changing it, and I'm so happy with
Well,
it. So take a look at it. It's very colorful and expressive. It's my
thanks.
name. It's KarenBrailsford.com. And through there, you can access, the blog. And I actually have been placing articles from my journalism career, which we never talked on, which is
Which we
very
didn't even get to that, but I
I
think we
love
might
that,
have to have a
actually.
part two.
And so, like, all kinds of fun celebrity interviews I've done. In that career, I also felt that I was being a practitioner in terms of having an interview or dialoguing with different people. So anyway, so yeah, so go to KarenBrailsford.com, and I'm on Instagram. You'll see the way to connect that way too.
I love it. Well, Karen Brailsford, thank you so, so much for being with me today. It's just such an honor and delight to connect with you and talk with you. And thank you for sharing with our community.
I feel the same way, Albert. It was really great to connect with you, and I hope we'll keep in touch. That would be wonderful.
I would love it.
Okay.